Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, every 6 hours, the NSA collects as much data as it exists in the entire Library of Congress. Then we'll talk about Dropbox getting called out for lying about their security and why the FTC is getting involved. And then after that, we take a big batch of your questions and emails, plus our tips for backing up your home systems, small business, and the enterprise. All that and more in this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 6th episode of TechSNAP, and my name is Chris. TechSNAP is our show on Jupiter Broadcasting that really digs deep into tech stories, tries to find extra details you might not have heard anywhere else, and joining me, like always, is Alan. Hey there, Alan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. Now, Alan is a former professor of network engineering and now vice president of Scale Engine, a very cool cloud hosting, and it's like a hybrid technology, really. That's kind of what I call it, Alan, at least. That is really awesome, and it runs our site and a lot of other popular sites online. So worth Googling and checking it out. But how you doing, Alan? What's been going on?
I'm good. Mostly just working.
Yeah, working on your day job. Now, we've got a ton of Q&A questions that were sent in to us, so we're going to round all those up. But I wanted to mention the email address up front before we got going, and that is techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. And if you've got your tech questions, like we've got a bunch of hey, what do you guys recommend for best practices when setting up a home server type questions? We've got some of those in today's show. We've also got some other types of questions that, anything really kind of that whole broad spectrum, just feel free to send it in.
Yeah,
and,
so if you have questions you want us
it.
to cover or a story you see that you think would be cool for us to cover, send it in. So it makes our job easier trying to decide what you guys want to hear if you tell us what you want to hear.
And if you're a Pinboard user, which I know not many of you probably are since it's a pay service and, I don't know, kind of a pain in the butt to pay for stuff. But Pinboard, if you tag it with TechSNAP, it'll show up in my RSS feed as well. If you want to bookmark a story, it's another way to get it in. To my view, at least I'm checking that. And I don't know, Alan, what's your first experience been now with Pinboard for about a week? What do you think?
It's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You
with
like
the little
it?
bookmark lid, I'm hitting it all the time.
Yeah, and it's the one feature that I like a lot that I haven't started using yet, but one feature I do use is it's a total archival of what you bookmark you can turn on. So I've had problems where on the shows before I've wanted to bookmark a story, and then for whatever reason when we sit down to do the show, the page is offline and I can't show it on the show, and it's like, oh well, we're not going to cover that.
And specifically, we've been covering stuff about what certain websites say, like the Dropbox one. Well, they go and change their site to correct the problem, and we can't show a before and after kind of thing.
We've got the original though now, so that's really cool. And then the other thing I like a lot about it, but I'm not using yet, is it has the ability to pull in from Twitter feeds, so I might be able to set it up so people could just tag stuff with pound TechSNAP, and then Pinboard would automatically find that stuff and auto bookmark it for me, which could be a really cool way for people to submit stories to the show. I haven't tried it out yet, but I've heard that works, so that could be really neat too. But anyways, all right, Alan, we've got a ton of news to get through before we get down to the Q&A, so why don't we start with this first story. Alan, I'm so glad when I saw in the doc that you put this in here. It's about the NSA and sort of the massive revealing that they're collecting 4 times the amount of info than the entire Library of Congress every single day.
Yeah. Now, I wish that you could find actual numbers on what the NSA actually collects, and they don't give any of those. And the Library of Congress talks about how they have 150 million entries cataloged, but they don't say, how much data that actually is.
Right.
Right. So we can't use that. Nobody has specific enough numbers for us to extrapolate as to how much data they're collecting.
What that actually means,
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's
now they're collecting it. They don't necessarily store it all.
Oh, you don't think so?
Well, no, probably not. Just because it would be impractical to store that amount of data.
That's what I was wondering. How would you store that much data?
Well, because they're listening in on every radio, every phone call, everything, every radio wave they can capture, right? And so because of that, they just search it for keywords and other things. Specifically, they look for anything that they can't understand and assume that that's encrypted, and they might want to look at it.
Sure. So they're doing real-time filtering, but you don't think they're storing it. Unless it flags something, then they probably store it.
If they flag something, then they might store it temporarily and have someone look at it and then decide whether to keep it or toss it.
Yeah. Huh.
But
now there's a good chance.
The closest thing I could find for some numbers is the Library of Congress has a website called American Memory, where they store public domain images, audio and video recordings, and so on. And that has tens of petabytes of data in it.
Whoa.
Now, I don't think that's what they meant when they said 4 times the amount of information in the Library of Congress, but still, that's a lot of data.
There's a good chance, too, that it's not just stuff restricted to U.S. citizens either, but
well,
I guess...
specifically, the NSA is not supposed to capture information on U.S. citizens. It's supposed to be everywhere else.
They have
been caught doing it before.
As sort of like the branch off from this story, I think the details of the story came out because the guy that created the fundamental protocol and system to do this monitoring, he no longer works for the NSA, but what he said is the original system that he designed, he had built in protocols and algorithms to anonymize the data. And so that way, because before 9/11, what their initial intent was supposedly was they wanted to be able to get the large trends, the large overall picture of what was going on. And then after 9/11, they decided to actually, we're going to de-anonymize. They let that guy go, supposedly. This is how the story goes. And then they started using this to collect all kinds of information. And he said that literally they have head ends at all of the major ISPs and even a lot of the small ISPs, and they're just sitting there collecting web traffic and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
It's pretty insane.
And, every credit card transaction and everything.
That's a lot of data that I would love to see the infrastructure. Just as the geek in me, I'd really love to see what that would look like. Just like the connections coming into this place and what the infrastructure must look like. It must be amazing. The bandwidth must be just incredible.
It must be.
I'm sure they must have regional areas where they do the processing.
Probably
they have to.
But they're building some massive data center in Utah.
Probably for this.
Yeah.
Should we move on to another area where things
just another thing was that the NSA has the ability to apply for patents, but under a gag order. So when the NSA applies for a patent, nobody knows about it. If later someone applies for a patent for a similar thing, then the NSA patent becomes public, and the NSA gets a never expiring patent on that technology.
Oh, that's...
So... They patent things, and then basically it's a watch list. If anybody else invents something like this, they don't get a patent on it. We do. But unlike a regular patent, when they apply for one, people don't find out the details of how the system works unless somebody else tries to invent the same thing. A couple weeks ago during the iPhone GPS story, we talked a little bit about some people had come up with a way to geolocate you based on your ping through a different series of routers.
Right.
So if you're 20 milliseconds from this router and 10 milliseconds from this router, then you're probably inside this circle.
Right.
Well, it turns out the NSA patented that in 2004.
And we didn't know until they
And the patent didn't become public until somebody else invented the same thing.
So what happens in that scenario?
The NSA gets the patent. And the guy who invented it after gets nothing.
It sucks, but they can obviously the technology can still be used, so the NSA must then license it.
I don't know exactly how that works, but the point is that the NSA did patent it in 2004, but nobody was allowed to hear about it.
Why do you suppose the NSA would need to have that technology? Oh, that's freaky. That's all I'm saying.
Well,
that's just a little freaky.
Their job is supposed to be to track people down outside of the States, right?
Yeah, and they're always thinking of clever ways to do that, as that shows. Yeah. Wow. Mm-hmm. All right, well, that was an interesting little last addendum to that story. Now, okay, so there's something that comes along when it sounds like it's too good to be true. There's a pretty good chance it is. And when you call something the Protect IP Act, well, it's a little scary. And Alan's going to fill you in on the details, but I'll set it up for you, Alan. It's the U.S. House and Senate are both drafting a rogue sites legislation that will support website blocking at the domain name level and require online networks like ISPs or credit card companies to immediately stop working with sites on this massive global blacklist.
Right. So specifically, this act is to allow U.S. government and copyright holders to take out sites that are not hosted in the U.S., where normal law enforcement doesn't allow them to do it.
Without warrant. Without a court order.
So basically what it's saying is once a site's on this blacklist, search engines have to remove this site from their search results.
And that's a key thing, too.
ISPs have to block access to the site. Credit card companies and advertising networks aren't allowed to do business with the site. And it's not only the government that can add sites to this blacklist. Rights holders can add sites to this blacklist and, compel Google to remove the site they're complaining about from the search results.
That's extremely scary, especially it depends on the system that's used too, but if it's like the YouTube system where it's sort of like it has an adorable system which they refer to as AL, I have been told by people at Google, and it's an algorithm that scans and finds things that it identifies that match copyright via visual cues and audio cues and things like that, and automatically just flags the video without any human intervention, and in some cases we'll just pull it down off of YouTube. Now, if you had a system like that combined with also, I don't know if it was a court decision or if it was another piece of legislation being pushed through, but it's to set up so that if you stream copyrighted material, like we're live streaming this right now, and this image I just showed right here of somebody modifying Google results could be a copyrighted image from Ars Technica for all I know. So technically, I could be violating this new act that is going through, or this new ruling that just happened, by streaming copyrighted material right now. And by doing that, I could flag myself for blacklisting. And then all of Jupiter Broadcasting is gone for the entire world, just like that, because of some sort of system like that. And that is really scary.
I was reading about it. The law is specifically it's meant to target people streaming movies, pirated movies.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's the intent.
It's too broad, and the definitions aren't strict. And so basically it says if you stream anything to a public audience and the licensing for the number of viewers that view it is over $2,500, which, considering the public display licenses for movies are ridiculously expensive, meaning anything, then they can sue you for millions of dollars or whatever.
Here's an example where they're in this article they're blaming Google, or at least giving Google a hard time. They say Google came into particular scrutiny because if you did a Google search for free MP3 Taylor Swift, the entire first page of results came from unlicensed sites.
Right. Well, it's a search engine. It searches the internet. What do you want from it?
Something must be done about this, Alan. Something must be done.
Well, Google's main concern with this Protect IP Act is that rights holders will become trolls and will just be flagging everything, right? And we've seen this happen on YouTube. Stuff that is in no way a violation of any copyright gets hit with DMCA notices and gets pulled down. And it becomes the onus is on the person who published the original content to prove that it's not a copyright violation, rather than the rights holder having to prove that it is copyright violation.
Right. Well, and the other thing that scares me about this is that and I don't mean to get political, and I'll try not to get political, but the copyright industry who can directly put people on this blacklist, I just don't have a more politically correct way to say that, I believe has the U.S. presidential administration in its back pocket, to the extent that Vice President Joe Biden was recently given a Grammy. Joe Biden won a Grammy for his outstanding performance in defending the copyright industry's intellectual property. Joe Biden has a Grammy. I mean, this administration actively pursues other countries and gets up in their face regarding the sale of like the copyright in DVDs and things like that. I mean,
yes, actually,
they are actively involved with the recording industry, and it's too close of a relationship that goes all the way up with such sweeping power.
Exactly. The U.S. government has been pressuring the Canadian government to pass a Canadian version of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and they've been quite displeased that Canada hasn't passed such a law yet.
Oh, man.
And the reason that the minority government we used to have didn't try to pass the laws is because they knew that it would result in a massive backlash, right? People don't want to have their rights taken away.
Right. Yes. Well, so one more excellent story to follow. I haven't read through that whole article. I don't know where it's at.
The specific problems with this act are that rights holders would not have to seek the government's assistance in having a site censored.
So that would just be like the industry, that company would just call up this global database that all these people are hooked into and just make the addition.
They would seek a court order directly against the payment processor, the advertising network, or the search engine to get the site removed. But the law actively encourages search engines and other sites to take the action when they're asked by the rights holder rather than requiring the court order.
So what you're saying is the law is set so that it encourages them to bypass the court.
Yeah. It's like, we don't want the courts tied up dealing with all this, trolling. So the company should just do it when you ask, with no onus that they prove that the content is theirs or that it's willful infringement or that it's not fair use.
Oh my goodness. I mean, so it's just...
And more specifically, the Act provides legal protection to advertising networks and payment processors to prevent them being sued by customers when they discontinue the relationship. So if I have a legitimate site selling something and some rights holder comes along, goes to the credit card company and says, I want you to stop doing business with this site, and the credit card holder or the credit card processing company does cut me off, even though I'm not breaking any laws, then I can't sue the credit card company for discriminating against me because they're protected by this Protect IP Act through voluntarily cease doing business with infringing websites. But I don't actually have to be infringing. I just have to be accused of infringing.
Right. You're guilty immediately.
And the credit card company doesn't have to show that they had a court order to stop doing business with me.
And then you're out of business.
Definition of infringement is left up to the rights holder. And that's not the person who should be deciding what's infringement.
Right, because they're always going to err on the side.
Because the rights holders don't believe in fair use of any kind.
No, they're protecting what they believe is theirs. And very well legitimately in some cases is theirs. Or in some cases they're overreaching.
In some cases it is theirs, but they have this bad habit of doing things in an automated blanket way that has too many false positives.
Alan, I wanted to give a book recommendation that's from this topic, but I didn't want to step on anything that you might still want to cover in the story.
We're done, so.
Okay, all right. Now, I don't know. I'd be curious to know what you guys in the audience think of this. If maybe if on TechSNAP from time to time, if a story is related to a book that we've read, and maybe we'll give you a recommendation. If you like that idea, try to leave a comment so that we know. Otherwise, I don't want to. If it's boring and you guys don't care, I don't want to do it all the time. But in this case, there's an interesting book, and I've got two links, which you actually could help support the show with, too, as well, in the show notes. One goes to an Amazon affiliate link that contribution of the purchase goes to the show, and another one is for an Audible affiliate link, which goes to support the show. I listened to this book on Audible, but I think it would be a great read as well, and it's called The Master Switch, and it's by Tim Wu, and he is, I don't know if he's officially an historian, but he takes an historical look at the different mediums, like the newspaper, early print, the radio, TV, cable networks, and how they start as these sort of free and open networks in a sense and sort of explode with creativity and independent networks like our own and things like that. And then over time, through legislation and corporate monopolies and things like that, they sort of become these lockdown corporate platforms. And he uses examples from the past to sort of show how that's happening on the internet and how sites like Facebook and other sites sort of play into all of that. It's an incredibly interesting story, and it's an amazing read. It was a great Audible listen, too. So it's The Master Switch. I got mine on Audible, but also on Amazon. If you guys are interested and want a good read, go check that out. It was a great book, and it made me really think. And this whole story, Alan, reminds me of all of this because it
Exactly. Because, for example, when the internet was first getting very popular in the 90s and so on, there were ISPs everywhere. Right? You had a huge choice to pick where you wanted to get your internet connection from. And now most people only have one or two choices.
Well, and this is exactly what actually happened in the radio industry, too. There was, all of these independent places building these little indie regional radio stations and all this kinds of things, and then they came around and through legislation. And actually, and one thing I forgot to mention in that that book, The Master Switch, he spends a lot of time giving some fascinating, and I'm serious, I'm not kidding, fascinating information about the telephone companies and how they started with farmers, and farmers were building their own local free farm phone network, and they came in and sued those people and shut them down, and all of that kind of stuff. It's really interesting. Sorry.
Yeah, because even with radio stations, there used to be all these separate independent networks and so on, and now pretty much every radio station in Canada is owned by one of the three companies that happen to also sell cable internet.
I know. Hey, right? Alan, our next story, if we cover this company anymore, I'm going to need to make a visual for this company. It's called the Dropbox follow-up bump, and it should be the swoopy Dropbox visual. Because once again, and this is good, TechSNAP, it's good. We like to do our follow-ups. So let's do a quick follow-up story on Dropbox and sort of where they're at with everything that's been going on, all their security issues.
So a complaint has been filed with the Federal Trade Commission claiming that Dropbox engaged in deceptive trade practices by claiming that they securely store your data when in fact they don't store it very securely at all.
Wow. Wow,
Right.
yeah, because if just as like a TechSNAP flashback is we covered that the truth came out that the way Dropbox stores your files is, while yes, it's encrypted with a single key which they have for everybody's files, and they have sort of I guess they've updated their EULA now to sort of better reflect that.
Yep.
But they've basically come under fire, and it's interesting because really is the question I guess becomes is was Dropbox lying, or was it a case of sort of not a proper messaging? You know, like did they just not communicate it clearly? That
Right. Was it just the marketing person that wrote the promo didn't understand the actual technology?
I think that might have been. You know, there's a chance that might have been what it was. But that's not. They're getting in trouble for.
The onus is on them to be truthful.
An FTC complaint is a serious deal. This is no joke,
Yes.
and it.
I have a link to the actual complaint with the details as well. But it is believed by the complainant that the security claims made by Dropbox gave them a competitive advantage over other services. Specifically, users might have chosen a more secure service if they had known that the claims made by Dropbox were false.
Oh.
Right? So that's the specific issue is a claim on Dropbox's website that has since been removed that says all files stored on Dropbox servers are encrypted, AES 256, and are inaccessible without your account password. But because the way they encrypt it is once with their own key, they don't need your password to access the data. They made it seem like it was encrypted with an AES key that was stored using your password, so that only your password could unlock your files. But that's not how it works. That is how some other services work, but it's not how Dropbox works. And if you had known that, you might have chosen that other service instead of Dropbox.
I suppose so. I'm still not totally offended in the way they do it now because I selectively store. I selectively choose what I store in there to begin with. But I do think there is definitely
on the website.
I think definitely in the case of businesses, right, in enterprise usage and things like that, that's very, very, very likely that they would have chosen a different direction. In fact, I know a lot of businesses where the users have just sort of self-deployed because it's so easy to do. Right. And then the employee's defense has been, and I've seen this actually, the employee's defense has been, whoa, it's encrypted. It's encrypted. There's no problem here. So,
But basically, because Dropbox uses only a single AES key rather than a separate one for each user, employees or anyone with access at Dropbox can access your files at any time without needing your password. And the Dropbox page has been updated to reflect the fact that Dropbox will turn your files over to law enforcement and possibly other parties if they request it.
Yeah, and they claim that this is what Dropbox is now sort of updated to say is that unlike most online services, we have a small number of employees who must be able to access user data for reasons stated in our privacy policy, e.g., when legally required to do so. But that rare exception is not the rule. We have a strict policy and technical access controls that prohibit employees access except in rare circumstances. We employ a number of physical and electronic security measures to protect user information. So they're saying, yeah, it's one key, but that one key is protected like the Coke recipe. Kind of what they're trying to say, I think.
Sure, but would you rather have that, or would you rather have a key that only you have access to and you take care of making sure no one else accesses it?
Yeah.
Making it technically impossible instead of technically hard.
I guess something like Jungle Disk offers this, right? I believe Jungle Disk encrypts at the client end, and then
I think so.
And you can do like shared Jungle Disk storage now too.
Yep.
So maybe that's one route to go.
Someone else asked a question, but that one I didn't get to till next week.
Okay.
But next week we have a Q&A about one of the other services like Dropbox and how it's different.
Oh, very cool. I've been getting a lot of questions about that, so it's perfect. Yes. Perfect. All right, anything else on this story before we move to the next one? Or actually, no, the next one is we're moving into the Q&A now. This is exciting. It's our first Q&A, Alan. All right, I'll read the question to you, sir, and then I'll let you answer, okay? Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. Of course, I don't know how to pronounce this first one, so I'm just going to say Akito. Akito?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Akito says, what do data centers use for fire suppression now that Halon has been frowned upon, sir?
Right. So some data centers still use Halon because
it's there.
They just haven't changed.
Yeah,
right?
And they've been there for a while.
It's there, and it does put the fire out. It's not good for people. Well, people should stay out of my data center. However, most data centers, have either retrofitted or most data centers are actually new enough now that they've just been designed from the beginning to have to use clean agents such as FM200, which is a trade name for one specific system, and there's a bunch of other trade names for the same system. But basically, it's a chemical agent, and it's designed to remove the heat from a fire and extinguish it that way.
Yeah, because you don't want to use water.
Right, because water would wreck your electronics.
You might as well just let it burn.
Right.
You're not doing yourself any favors.
You might actually be able to recover more if your machine's got some smoke damage and it's melting rather than being sprayed with water.
Now, you included some videos here. Now, tell me about these. Are these like
we'll get to that in a second. But, So unlike other agents, FM200 does not leave an oily residue or otherwise degrade your equipment. Some of the ones, they didn't wreck the computer, but they made an awful mess. With FM200, you have to ventilate the room to get rid of it, but after that, you're pretty much ready to go again, right? And that can affect how long it takes you to get back online.
Yes, absolutely.
And
downtime is money.
They have some systems use carbon dioxide, CO2, and that just displaces the oxygen, and that prevents a fire from being able to burn.
Right.
Like so if you push out all the oxygen in the room,
makes it a vacuum.
Fire goes out. Yeah. Also, 3M, the chemical company, has developed a new non-conductive fluid. So it looks like water, but it doesn't conduct electricity.
Yeah, you have a link in the show notes if you guys want to read about this.
We have a YouTube video here they have a fish tank full of this liquid, and they dunk an LCD monitor in it while it's powered on.
Yeah.
They dunk a cell phone in it, and they continue to work fine.
That is neat.
Even while submerged in this liquid.
I would love to have that on my cell phone. So they must have to coat every bit in this device, right? I mean, every electronics must be just totally schmovered.
Well, no. Basically the liquid doesn't short anything out.
Right, the fluid itself doesn't. Right.
So it's not water. It's a special fluid called Novec, and it doesn't harm your electronics.
That is really something.
Honestly, in a server room deployment, I would worry about the fans if they all of a sudden get water sprayed at them.
Well, you've seen also like those oil-cooled PCs, right?
Yeah, I've seen those ones with the mineral oil.
And you got to wonder, what if you just had your whole data center submerged?
Yeah, then it couldn't catch it. How would you access your equipment to work on?
You'd have to go swimming. You'd have to swim into your
scuba gear. Scuba admins, that's ridiculous.
One of the local PC vendors, we actually went down there a couple of years ago, called Puget Systems, is well known for building one of these PCs, and they literally, you start up the PC and you build the whole thing. That. Yeah, and it runs inside a fish tank, and you kind of wonder.
The fan on the power supply still works even in the liquid.
It does, yeah, and it still actually draws some heat away, and it of course just circulates the fluid over the. Yeah, so that's pretty neat. I don't know. What about a self-contained like 3U server that was like a mini fish tank?
That'd be pretty cool.
That's pretty neat. All right, that's a great one. That's a great QA. Now you had
rack-mountable fish tanks.
Yeah, rack-mountable fish tanks, exactly. Now did you have a war story that sort of fit with this?
Yes,
I did. Actually. Like a little mini war story. All right, do it. Let's do it.
So when I worked at Ontario Power Generation in the data center there, we had a problem with one of the cracks, which is a computer room air conditioner, special air conditioner designed to run 24/7 and provide a more stable temperature in the room.
Right.
So our on-site data center was having heat issues because the air conditioning was breaking down.
So wasn't that stable and reliable is what you're saying?
Yeah, it was supposed to be, and it was. So anyway, we called and they sent a refrigeration technician to come and look at it. Before we let him in the server room, because it has keypad to get access to it, we're like, you cannot do any soldering or welding or anything like that without coming and telling us first, because there's a very sensitive fire suppression system in the server room. And so he's like, okay. All right, so we sent him in there, and he started working, and everybody went back to work. So I was down the hall in the test lab working on the Windows 2000 or Windows NT to Windows 2000 migration. So but when it was a while.
Yeah, and stressful.
Yes. So anyway, I'm sitting there working, and then all of a sudden I hear the fire alarm going off, and I'm like, "What's that?" And it's like, and then I realized, crap. This guy must have started soldering or something without telling him. And
it circulates into the air, and then the sensor picks it up, and it sets off the system, the alarm. You didn't release any, no suppression agents were released or anything, was it?
Almost. So basically, the way the system works is, when the alarm goes off, you have 30 seconds to silence it before it starts engaging active suppression.
Oh my gosh.
At the time, this was a Halon system, but the Halon had been removed for safety reasons.
Oh, okay.
So it wouldn't have deployed Halon, but part of the first stage of response after the 30 seconds without being silenced was to turn off all power to the building and override the UPS system to turn the servers off as well to prevent an electrical fire. Specifically, this is a power plant, so they're extra concerned about anything related to electricity.
Sure.
Right. So when I'm down the hall working in the test lab and I hear this, and first of all, it made me jump just because I'm sitting there quietly working in the test lab, and all of a sudden there's klaxons and flashing lights and everything.
Klaxons. I'm watching a video of a fire suppression system for those of you who haven't seen it before, and it's a little more dramatic than what Alan was going through, but it is designed for like massive fires that take place. And Alan, one time, this is just a little quick mini interruption war story, is speaking of just sitting there and having alarms go off, is I was one of the few earthquakes that I've been in here in Washington State. I was sitting at my desk one day working on something probably similar to what you were working on, and not only does the ground start shaking, and I'm like, what the crap is going on? But then alarms start going off and all kinds of things. I'm proud to say, though, that my first reaction wasn't to like duck and hide under the table, but it was to get up and start running as fast as I could to the data center to make sure none of the servers fell over.
Exactly.
So,
I remember when there was one here last summer, I felt the whole building shake. I'm like, wow, did something just explode? And I'm like, nope, it's earthquake.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next Q&A, or did did you not finish up?
I got to finish the story.
All right, yeah, we'll finish up. See, I wasn't sure. All right.
Anyway, so the alarm is going off, and I'm like, oh, right. So I take off and run down the hall trying to get the alarm panel, because if I don't get there within 30 seconds, it's going to shut down the entire data center.
Right.
And all the operations at the power plant, basically. It would have been a big problem. So I'm almost there, but then the tone of the alarm changes. I'm like, oh crap, does that mean I'm too late?
Is that like the
lights are still on, so I must be. So I find out later that meant I had 10 seconds left.
You were in the zone.
Yes. So I had to run up, and we had opened the door on the panel ahead of time because we were expecting to have to deal with this later in the day, and hit the big red stop button and save the day.
We had a data center that had a big red stop button that was at elbow level
Height.
So we've actually at one time we actually had somebody elbow the button on accident, and it was an immediate drop everything thing, because it was like for the fire kind of thing.
So this one normally is behind a closed glass door with like a key.
Yeah.
But like they had unlocked it and it was open because we were expecting to have to deal with this. Because as the new guy at the data center there, my job was, when he was going to start soldering, would be to stand there and press the button.
Oh.
But he forgot to tell us.
Right. So you didn't know.
Yeah. It would have made a hell of a mess, and there would have been much screaming and hair pulling. So luckily, I got there in time and saved the day.
Well done, sir. Well done. All right, so let's move on to Dreams Void's question, because Dreams Void wrote in and he said, I'd like to back up my Linux and Windows computers to my Linux server I have at home, maybe using something like rsync. How should I set this up?
Right. So rsync has a number of advantages. Specifically, it uses a regular checksum like MD5 and a rolling checksum to calculate the difference in a file without having to transfer the whole file in either direction.
Oh, so yeah. Okay.
As the file changes, you can send just the delta, just the change over the network. And so if you're backing up files that are changing slowly, you don't have to resend the whole file every time it changes.
Right. So it's like it moves the blocks of that file. Is that how it works? It's like
it moves just the changes of the file.
That's neat.
And because it uses a rolling checksum, it can find the exact size of the change rather than doing it in chunks.
So I guess you say he could write like a command line script, because our thing's like just a command line tool, so he could just do something quick and dirty.
The Windows version has graphical. There are ones that have graphical interfaces, but basically, yes, you just set up a script that says take this directory and copy it to this server in this directory.
Right.
The problem with any system like that is it's not actually a backup, right? It's just a copy of the files.
Good point.
So in a real backup, you'd have multiple versions of each file.
Mm-hmm.
With this system, say a file accidentally gets corrupted. It didn't save properly last time you saved it for whatever reason.
Or it's a doc where you made a change and decide you don't want that change and you want to go back to yesterday's version.
You deleted a paragraph and you want that paragraph
Yeah, exactly.
back. Now, if you're just doing rsync and have a copy, if you don't realize the mistake before the next time it does its backup,
it'll back that one up and
then
override.
it's backed up the broken data.
Uh-huh.
And you have no recourse. You're out of options.
Right.
In a real backup system, you'd have multiple copies of the file in multiple states. So rsync might not be the best solution.
No, but something tells me you and I might have a couple solutions.
Solution, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you can get rsync for Windows and Linux and Mac and so on and use that. And that'll work for keeping a copy, and especially keeping a copy up to date.
Mm-hmm.
What rsync was meant for was keeping mirrors of a website up to date.
Yeah, or so you could do it as a mirror as your file server, a mirror of your documents directory, but not as a backup.
Right. It's not a backup. It's a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing this backup over LAN, you don't really need to save that bit of transfer. Right? You have bandwidth in LAN, and it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So a real backup solution might be better for your home LAN. If you were doing it over the internet, rsync would maybe save enough bandwidth to make that trade-off worth it.
Sure. I see where you're going.
So I've included links for rsync for Windows, if anybody wants that. Then you recommended Backup PC.
I strongly recommend Backup PC. Now, it's a little bit more setup, but it's just, if like on a Linux box, it's in your repo generally, and it's some simple config. It's not really that bad.
Exactly. And because of the way it's built, it can use rsync.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's how I use it.
Or you can have it just use SMB and just connect with the regular Windows file sharing and copy the files from your Windows box.
And that's how you'd back up the Windows box. So from your Linux box, you back up the Mac
NFS for the Linux box or whatever. There's a bunch of different ways.
Yep. It can actually even use Apple File Protocol. Or actually, SMB to the Mac.
tar over SSH as well.
Yes. Yeah. So you just which is great for backing up to a Linux box or backing up from a Linux box. And it has a beautiful revision system. Very well done. You can restore back to specific versions, and you can restore to the original location, or you can just download that. And the other thing that it does that I think probably is one of my number one favorite things is that it is really smart about not backing up the same file twice. So like if one computer has the same MP3 as another computer, like I have my music library duplicated on two different machines, it'll only store one copy of that MP3, but then it hard links it into those backups. So it's there. So if you ever do a full restore, it's
doing full deduplication.
Yeah, full deduplication and some storage pooling that you get a surprising amount of backup space with Backup PC.
Especially when you're backing up to disk instead of tape, you have these advantages that some systems don't take advantage of.
Yeah, so Backup PC is worth checking out. But what about Bacula? I mean, that's a little more intense.
Bacula is even more setup, and it actually has like 3 or 4 different services you'd have to set up. There's a director, the storage daemon, the database, and then the file daemon that you put on the multiple machines. But in a more enterprise-type setup where you have, I'd say, if you have less than 5 machines, it's probably not worth it.
Yeah.
But if you have more than that, then it probably is.
Yeah, and especially on an enterprise environment where you want to have just all kinds of features where this really revisioning, where you can, and also like you can do month-end copies and quarter-end copies. And
some of the things that it has an SQL database, so you can do your own analytics and stuff on your files. It has the deduplication system.
Oh, yeah.
It has a system of base backups where you back up like a base image. Like if you're using image deployments on, say, all the desktops in your company, you can back up that base once and have it store that forever, and then only do the files that have changed from that base for each machine on top of regular deduplication. So you have these base backups on top of the deduplication system.
Right.
And another thing it has are virtual full backups. It can take it takes the last full and some of the more recent, say, differentials and incrementals, and can make a new full backup without having to take that over the network, which can be especially important if you have laptops that are only rarely connected and are connected remotely.
Yes, right.
You can still manage a full backup of that laptop without having to transfer the full amount of data.
And this Bacula has a Windows client which supports backing up open files as well.
Yes, it has a Windows client that does the volume shadow copy to back up open files.
Yeah.
And it also has a plugin you can get if you have a Microsoft Exchange server.
Oh,
that you want to back up.
I didn't know that. That's nice.
Yes.
I would say, too, that it's a good system to play with if you want to learn the backup. If you're becoming an IT administrator and you want to get comfortable in backup terminology and how a backup system needs to work and how you need to think about tapes or whatever like that, Bacula is a great system to even just learn on. And since it's free, you can just go check it out.
Very well documented as well.
Yes, very good documentation. What do you think about giving a plug for TarSNAP, too, for people that are just looking for a really simple backup solution?
TarSNAP is only for Unix.
Right.
It's a shell script. I think it's written in C, actually. But and
It's a quick online backup system.
Yes.
Right?
It just stores your data in Amazon S3, but it uses the BSDiff algorithm to only have to upload the deltas, or your change files.
Well, and speaking of Amazon S3,
based on the same algorithm that TechSNAP and FreeBSD Update are based on, and it's written by the same author actually.
Also, just speaking about Amazon S3, a JB Viewer 11, first time TechSNAP Live viewer, which you could be watching TechSNAP Live as well over at jblive.tv. First time TechSNAP Live viewer, and he said, what about home backup? I wouldn't mind giving a plug for Jungle Disk. It's a good home backup system, and then depending on what you want, you can get it for $4 to $2 a month, and they include like smartphone apps. You can check your data there, and it does encryption on your end, and it also does somewhat Dropbox functionality where you can get like a cloud drive. So it's not a bad system for a home user, like if you just have one computer you want to use. My wife recently has been using CrashPlan, and CrashPlan is kind of interesting because what it does is it lets you synchronize to another CrashPlan user for free. You don't have to pay anything. You can just use the CrashPlan software, and for free, it will also manage backups to like a USB media for you, like a local drive or a network volume, right? And then
that's cool.
If you want to pay like a flat rate, you can get unlimited storage for online to their online drive, where it also encrypts locally first. And so they'll send, and they have Mac, Windows, and Linux clients, and you install CrashPlan, and it sits there in the background and just sort of always backs up your machine. I wish these guys had like an affiliate program or something, so we got something for saying that. I don't make any money, but my wife's been using it for a couple of weeks, and so far she seems to like it. Oh, I think maybe more than a couple of weeks now, but so that's CrashPlan for home users, and you can get unlimited storage for $6 a month.
Right, like Bacula has that same system. You can do AES 256 encryption, and it happens on the computer with the original files, and that key never gets sent to the storage server.
So if somebody had a decent like remote internet connection, like a Fios connection, they could just back up to their home corporate office, and it would be encrypted as it transmitted to the home backup to the corporate backup server.
So that means even someone with root access to the storage server can never read your data unless you accidentally or on purpose give them your AES key.
Cool. Well, that's some good backup tips.
It can also do, if you don't want to encrypt, you can just do SSL, where it'll be encrypted as it goes over the internet, but it's stored unencrypted on the drive or tape at the other end. Right. Yeah. So you have the option of all of that.
That's really nice because, to be honest, when you're in an emergency and you need to restore data and you're the IT administrator, if the data that's what you're restoring is encrypted, that's a whole nother layer of recovery you have to go through.
Yep. And it's a lot of key management stuff, right?
Yeah.
Especially if every machine has its own separate key, then you have to manage all those keys. And
Yeah. You know where I'm going with that, Alan. While it's good, it's one more thing that if you don't do right, you will be so sorry in an emergency. So it's one thing to keep in mind. Any other things we want to talk about? I know we've got more Q&A, and we want more, so send those to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com. I'm still going to hold my war story to next episode, too, because we got
one more question we can do.
Oh, we do? All right. Okay, I didn't realize. All right, here we go. Let me bring up the doc. Oh, and it's a good one, too. It's from Neen. He says, and this is a good one because I think a lot of people don't know. What are the differences between a server and a normal desktop computer? Alan, take a stab at that. What do you think?
Well, generally, there's not that big of a difference. Some of them, in fact, there's no difference at all. But on the higher end ones, sometimes there's quite a few features that a desktop computer doesn't need. Typically, a high-end server will have redundant power supplies, right? So it'll have two or more so that if one dies, it can keep running.
Right.
Some bigger things like blade servers will have 4 or more power supplies because they need more power than one power supply can provide, or one connection to a socket can provide, right? Like some of the slightly older big IBM blade servers required 2 separate 240 volt, 30 amp power connections.
Those were hardcore, man.
Yeah. So with the redundancy, so it took 2 power supplies just to power it, and then you needed redundancy. So you would have 4 or more power supplies in these things. And normally what it would do is it would run each of them at a quarter of the power.
Right.
And then if one failed, one of them would have to go up to near its max.
Yeah, I'd have to step it up. The HP ML310 is the bane of my existence here. I'm getting a shot for the video viewers here. This guy right here, what this is an overpriced desktop. It is literally an HP desktop with a slightly, not even slicker case, just a different case.
Yes.
And it is just a desktop PC, like even like the stock Intel CPU cooler.
Yep.
But they price it at a server price. So sometimes, and it comes with a better support contract. So sometimes that's all they are. But like Alan says, sometimes they're like 4 power supply, 10 hard drive beasts. You know.
Yeah. Because one of the other things is to be able to continue operating in the event of a problem, most servers will have some form of RAID. Now, a lot of enthusiast desktop motherboards can do RAID now, but
Not
most
the
of the
same
time,
thing.
right? Most of the time, that's only like RAID 1 or 0. In a server, you're more typically going to have something like RAID 5 or 10. And instead of using an onboard chip that uses the processor to do most of the math, they will have a dedicated add-in card that's doing it.
Right.
That, for example, will have 512 megabytes of its own RAM just to use as an extra cache on top of whatever cache your disks have.
Just the RAID card alone.
Yep. They typically use better disks instead of your regular off-the-shelf ones. They'll have nearline or enterprise class drives.
Yeah, here's a shot of a server with this is an HP DL360, and the drives that are shot are Ultra 320 SCSI hard drives. So they're not IDA or they're not IDE or SATA. They're Ultra SCSI. Now and HP servers are now
swappable too.
Right. They slide right out. This is an old model here.
Right.
HP servers are now SAS.
You would see 5 or more hard drives probably, and when one of those dies, you can just pull it out and pop in a new one, and it'll rebuild without the data being inaccessible or the machine being offline. And for example, you can see in that picture there, the 2 power supplies are also hot swappable. So when one of them dies, you pull it out and you put in a fresh one, and the machine was on the entire time.
Yeah.
No reboot required.
Right. That is the key part.
When it's mission critical, that's the important thing. Mm-hmm. So most servers will have a higher end RAID card with its own processor and its own RAM on it, and sometimes also a battery to
so that way when you shut it off, it can
save
flush
that
the cache.
data in the event of a power failure.
Yep. And a lot of times too, they'll have ECC RAM, so where the RAM does
RAM instead of regular RAM. So when there's a problem, it fixes that without the hardware noticing.
Yeah.
Or without the software noticing.
Yeah.
They also a lot of the servers will have out-of-band management, so a way to control the server, like pretend to be at the keyboard and mouse and access the BIOS, even when remotely over the network.
Yeah, the Compact servers years ago, and now HP integrated this when they bought Compact, had this, they're well known for having this awesome lights out management card where it's either integrated into the motherboard depending on the class of the server, or it's an expansion PCI Express card. And that PCI Express card has a BIOS on there, it has a USB hub on there, and then you could it started out as Telnet, but later on you could use a web browser. You could get a full remote console. You could boot up the server and see the BIOS in your web browser. And then later on, you could even attach your local USB devices to the server over the internet. It's really cool.
Like our servers have an Intel thing like that where we can power them on and off. We can power it on even when it's powered off, just over a second MAC address they have on their built-in network card.
Neat. Yeah. Servers are designed to be able to also, I guess this is true I run some desktop PCs 24/7 as well, but the original, the design, for example, airflow in the server, there's generally 3 or 4 fans in different, up front, and another set of fans in the back. I mean, those fans will die, and if one dies, the server actually has the technology to tell you specifically which fan. And depending on the server, the fans are hot swappable as well, so you can open up the thing and pull out the fan and install a new fan while it's running, and that kind of stuff.
And a lot of them will have extra indicator lights on the front or the back to tell you what's wrong.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of the good ones start at a $4,000 price point.
Exactly. Well, we talked about that remote management system. A lot of those remote management systems have the ability to allow you to log into one of them and turn a light on or set a message on a front-facing LCD, so that when you have racks and racks of servers,
you can have a guy who's standing there. You'd be like, the one with the blue light flashing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, I'm going to make some way to visually indicate on the front and the back of this server which one is the one that's having the problem. Yeah. Because when you have, 100 identical servers, sure, you have names and maybe you have labels on them, but it's better to be able to tell for sure.
Yeah, I got here. I'll show a picture here. Of course, this one has with all the blue lights on, but just as a sort of analogous of what Alan is saying here, that in a rack situation in a data center, generally you're working with probably a technician who works at the data center, and your server is just the same as everybody else's server to him. He doesn't know anything. The numbers don't mean anything to him. They all look identical. So you need a signaling method to say, okay, the one with the blinking light, and it's on HP servers, it's a blue light.
It'll have a trouble light. It'll be labeled like trouble or something like that.
Yeah.
You'll be able to indicate on it. And some of them will also have that on the back, because you labeled the front of your server here with those numbers. You go around to the back, which one's which now?
Yeah. And it gets further than that. To really be able to have somebody walk through, you'll even have to label the Ethernet cable coming out, and so all right, this has to go back into Ethernet number 0 when you plug it back in. You cannot plug this cord into Ethernet number 1 and
because
things
that
like
has
that.
a different IP address. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of little things.
You can see some pictures on Scale Engine's website or the network tab. You can see our gear, and we got all the same things.
I'll have to have that ready next time we need to show that. I'll have it up on the screen. All right, Alan, was there anything else we want to touch on in this episode?
No, I think that was about it.
All right, I'm excited because one of the things, the little behind-the-scenes thing here about TechSNAP is I think now every episode, before we sit down to shoot the episode, Alan already has the doc started for the next episode. And I love that because that means there's so much content and so much stuff that we've already got stuff planned for next week. I know we've got the Q&A stuff. I'm going to get my war story in, which now is over, and I've sort of done the post-op analysis. It's a pretty incredible story. I came probably within 10 minutes of losing a year's worth of work. It was really something. And but then at the last moment pulled out. And it was like one of those amazing 360 degree, or I guess 180 turns. It was just incredible. Yep. So I'll share that next week. And
I can't wait to hear that.
TechSNAP comes out every Monday mornings over at JupiterBroadcasting.com, and we're live on Thursdays. Go over to JupiterBroadcasting.com/calendar to find out when we're doing that. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you next week.